Welcome back to another episode of the Israel Connection. Ever since October 7th, Israel is at war. Things are unclear, very vague, and it is become increasingly more and more difficult to cover everything that's happening, but we're still going to do our best to provide that with this episode. Here we go. Hello, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to another Israel Connection. It's really good seeing all of you. I think we have a few people missing, so they'll probably join us as we go. I hope you all had a really good Thanksgiving and an opportunity to reset, rest, and have some good time with family. And in addition to all of that, throughout the weekend, we saw the release of the hostages. A very, very small amount out of the 240 that has been taken hostage by Hamas. The first three, I don't know how else to address it except for human shipments have been flew out of Gaza via ambulances to Egypt and then to Israel, with some of the children and elderly that has been the first one to be released from Hamas captivity after 50 days of being in captive. This is also part of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas on Gaza Strip as an opportunity for Hamas to release the hostages. And of course, Hamas has asked in exchange convicted felons that were in Israeli prison to be released on a relations of 1 to 3. For every Israeli hostage, men, women, or children, 3 terror convicted felons will be released from prison. So on, there's been 2 successful releases of about 12 or 13 at a time. There was a promise as part of the agreement that they would not separate families apart, which means if the children go free, the parent that was captive with them go as well. This was not kept by Hamas, and they've released some kids without their parents that are still captive. And they also released a few Israeli citizens that had an international citizenships, whether it's Thailand. And yesterday, I think it was someone who had a Russian citizenship as a tribute to the Russian government. We haven't heard yet from any of the hostages that was released about how captivity was like. We've heard of only about a few of them. It's because the interview is very, very intimidating, I guess, for a lot of them to then try and speak up of the horrors that they've seen. But from the few notions we do get, they were extremely neglected in captivity. We've heard about an 84-year-old woman that was very sick and was denied medication for a month, for 50 days, until she was released, and now she's in an immediate life risk right now, being treated in an Israeli hospital with no notion whether or not she'll make it out, because she was just completely neglected. No food, no medication for 50 days, barely enough to make it. The Red Cross didn't had any access to the hostages, nor they even share this with the public, which is an extreme violation of human rights, with the fact that they've taken hostage civilians, which is by itself a violation of human rights. I thought that, Deborah, you want to ask the question? I'm having a hard time just keeping track with the chat and the
Sure. I thought they had said that the Palestinian women and children who were being released had not, in fact, been convicted of anything, but were awaiting trial or whatever. So was that a misunderstanding on my part, or was it a mixed bag that some were convicted felons and some were?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer that question a bit later, right? I will address that question. First, I'm going to go to Susan, who already had the question asked. And then we'll address your questions, okay? Susan, please go ahead.
Yes, I was wondering why there was such a 3-to-1 ratio of Israelis released to others in captivity on the other side.
because that's what Hamas asked.
Okay.
That's the response. That was the agreement. They've asked for a 3-to-1 ratio, which is actually very, very good compared to the last deal Israel did for the release of the hostages, which was over 1,000-to-1. Hamas value less life than Israel does. That's my response to that. And they know that they can leverage the fact that those are innocent citizens while they are prisoners, and Israel is very easy to squeeze if you want. So it will release whatever it can for the hostages. Does that answer your question? I mean,
Well, it doesn't, if Israeli values life the way they do, why is so few okay? Why isn't, I mean, if
What do
they're
you-
like all or nothing kind of a thing, I say, why give them an opportunity to squeeze them like that?
what do you mean? Why do they release so?
I mean, why is it okay for Israel to say, okay, one is good, just give us one, that's good. Thousands of yours, okay, to our one. Why don't they just say, it's not all of them are good. We want all of them, or we'll keep blowing you to smithereens, because that's the choices are so dark and bleak.
And on media coverage, if Israel refuses a deal, how do you think that's going to look? Do you think the government has a possibility to go to the hostages' family saying, we had an opportunity to release 40 out of the 240. We've decided to refuse that deal and keep on pushing, hopefully that they will not start executing them?
So then this is a negotiation that's made on terms with the families of the hostages. Is that what
Yeah,
you're saying?
they're definitely part of it. They're a huge so they've been organized as one headquarters, which is the headquarters for the families of the hostages, and is the one been pressing for the release of the hostages. But when you're dealing with a terror organization who has no issues to kidnap after executing entire families, what prevents them for executing more? Right? From the Israeli perspective, you want to get as many as quick as possible out of there and out of immediate danger. And even 10 is better than nothing, I guess. Again, this is my perspective as an Israeli. I don't know what stands behind like the whole negotiation process. I don't really know like the entire, pressures and all the different opportunities that came by from all different sides regarding that. We don't know who was involved as well in the negotiation. It was mediated through Egypt, but we just don't really know what happened behind the scenes. This is my take as an Israeli to say it's better than nothing. But again, this is just me. Yes, we have a lot of hand risen. Let's start with Shel Saltzman or David.
Okay, it's actually David. Rochelle is here.
Oh, okay.
Because Hamas postponed the release because they claimed something was not being met, and because the Qataris were unable to resolve it within several hours, and the Egyptians had to come into the negotiation to resolve it. Are the Egyptians now taking center stage, and is that not better in long term for Israel?
And I was corrected that the agreement between Israel and Hamas was that it's only children and elderly. No men or women, adults, should be released at this first deal. Only children, and if they're part of a family, then their parents as well. And we know that Hamas has already didn't stand up to this and released children without their parents that are still in captive. Deborah, you go ahead. You raise your hand.
Well, no, I was just going to reiterate what you had said is, I think part of it is, I absolutely agree with you that Israel values lives far more than Hamas does. Hamas could care less about the lives. It's shown that in its treatment of not only the Israelis, but also the Palestinians who it uses as human shields. But in terms of the number of people exchanged, there is unfortunately, in my mind, a certain calculation that there are just a whole lot more Palestinians than Israelis, and Israelis want to get back their people, even if it costs them a little more by giving exchange. And as Dean pointed out last time, and if I'm not mistaken, Dean, I think that 1,000 to 1 was to get back either one hostage or one body of somebody. But they still, that is what Israel does. It wants to get back its people because it values them so much more than, not to say, I know some people have said, well, that's sort of saying that it takes 3 Palestinians to be worth the lives of an Israeli. I don't want to look at it that way, but there is a certain amount of negotiation Israel will do because it wants to get back those people and it values their lives so much.
And again, these are not men and women and children in exchange for women and children. These are convicted or at least arrested felons that try to kill people. The really big notion that I think, at least on international media, we misses a lot of the time is that not all terror combatants are adult men. Some of them are women, and some of them are children that chooses or indoctrinated to choose terror as a way of life. All of the prisoners that right now has been released as part of this deal, and a lot of the victims that are reported by the Gaza Ministry of Health as victims of the Israeli bombing are actually terror combatants. There's a lot of women out there that are combatants for Hamas. There's a lot of under 18-year-olds that are combatant of Hamas, both in Gaza and imprisoned in Israel, because they either try to stab someone or they stab someone. Arson was also part of the convictions for some of them. This is just, these are no innocent women and children that are being released for the innocent civilians that are the one taken hostage. These are prisoners and people who are accused. Now, there is a very, very big difference between this one and the complexity of the Israeli judicial system and how it treated terror. Now, there is an opportunity in Israel, a legal opportunity that calls an administrative arrest, which means you can hold someone arrested up to 6 months, even without, what you call that? I'm missing the word.
Charges.
Without charges. Thank you, Deborah. Yes, and that's because Israel is a liberal democratic country that faces terror on a daily basis. In the judicial system, and let's try to remember that 2 months ago, we talked about how complicated the Israeli judicial system is and how much stress there is on the Israeli judicial systems to operate. So considered all of civilian lives that needs to go through the judicial system processes, in addition to all terror acts and terrorists that needs to get a conviction, not even a conviction, charges pressed against them after committed an attempt or a successful attempt for an assault. So that's why administrative arrest is happening. It is not a new legal process that's been approved. It has been ongoing with Israel for the moment it starts, because it is something that is allowed for a state of war to happen, and Israel is in a constant state of war legally. State of an emergency is the more correct legal term. But since that is the case, then also administrative arrest is something that is existing. The fact that there has not been pressed charges against them yet does not mean that they didn't commit the felony. It's that they are now being processed through a very, very complicated and overstressed system that does not operate very well right now. If you remember, and again, I'm going back, as part of the judicial reform, the government has refused to get together the judges' election committee because that was one of the leverage they could use to pressure the system in their advantage. And they still hadn't gathered that committee yet. So there's still a lot of judges missing in all different levels of Israeli judicial system to apply to those cases that need attention, especially right now when you have thousands more terrorists that needs charges pressed against them and conviction and trial process to go through, but they're still lacking all of them. I think that one of the hardest jobs right now is to be a judge in Israel and face all of that pressure, all of that lack of peers that you don't have, and at the same time also, right, go through that process for all of those new felonies. And that goes again for all of those that has been arrested so far. We had a few more questions. Phyllis, I think you raised your hand, so you can go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to say that I did just come across an article that from the Times of Israel that Jake Sullivan, our national security advisor, said yesterday on Meet the Press that part of the deal was that the Red Cross would have access to the hostages, and that they should know something by the end of the fourth day, by today, as to what the status of that is.
So I've read today that Red Cross access to the hostages was part of the initial deal.
Right.
And that Hamas did not do it. So
right.
Hamas is keep not holding up to the agreement.
Right.
Israel continues the ceasefire because any hostage is valuable, even though Hamas does not keep up to its word.
Right.
And Phyllis and I had been talking before we started the Zoom. I was just venting off some steam because I'm extremely frustrated with how humanitarian human rights organizations are treating this this whole situation. Not a single hostage was accessed by the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, or any humanitarian rights organizations. They have been fully mistreated. A lot of them have been starved for over a month. There's been an 84-year-old woman that was denied medication for over a month and a half, and she is now on an immediate life risk after being released as one of the few that was released on the weekend. She was denied complete access to anything. They were held in what may seem to be a dungeon. Not even joking, not even using this as a metaphor, an actual dungeon, a hole underground with no light, no food, no medication for 50 days. There have been more and more evidence of what happened to the victims of October 7th, whether it's torture, rape, sodomy, all of that. Where are the human rights organizations now? Where are the women's rights organizations now standing for this? Or unless if you're a Jewish person, then you don't value as much. If you're an Israeli, you value even less. We know that there is an ongoing release right now of more hostages. I saw in the chat that you mentioned that the truce was extended for another 2 days. I hope that means 2 more releases. I really hope so. But this is an ongoing negotiation. I was also mentioned that the headquarters for the families of the hostages is not part of the negotiation. And this is part of the criticism that they're pressing against the government, that they are not being kept up with what's happening. They don't get notified about the hostages. They don't get notified until the very late point of almost the release itself, the morning of, or even the noon of that day of the release, about what's happening, which is just another ongoing frustration of the whole government and the way it addresses and faces the situation in generally and specifically in front of the families of the hostages and the victims of October 7th. We know that from the starting of the fight from October 7th, it took a lot of governmental agencies a couple of weeks, if not even a month, to let the families know that their loved ones has been the one killed on October 7th, in addition to the way that they're treating the relationship with the families of the hostages. I don't know what to say. It is extremely frustrating. I'm extremely frustrated about the whole weekend. I know I was supposed to be happy seeing all the faces of the children that were released, but the fact that children were kept, you know, in captive just prevents me to be happy in any way about the situation. And I think what's more frustrating is that my friend Noah is not going to be the first one to be released. She's a 25-year-old woman. She's not going to be on the first one. She's not going to be on the mid one as well. And it's even worse for families that know that there are the people that were taking hostage are soldiers. I don't know if they will ever be released, to be honest. But as we talk, even one is better than nothing. Everybody is extremely happy to see those faces, and seeing all the videos of families reunite is very heartwarming and very reassuring, as much as it can be. But I don't think any country ever has to go through what we're going in Israel. I really don't think so. This is just collective torture right now that they're releasing 10 at a time for 5 days. And you know, I'm just frustrated. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Thanks, Dean. So I'm curious what your take is on the question of what Hamas is going to be able to do during this pause to replenish supplies or to restore their capability. I know that Israel was avoiding a ceasefire because they didn't want to give Hamas a chance to get off their back foot. And at a rate of 10 per day, if they do continue to release hostages, we could be talking 2 to 3 weeks of additional pause.
Mhm.
What do you think, or what have you heard about Israel's ability to prevent Hamas from retooling during that period?
So if you look at the situation, Gaza is an autonomous piece of land, right? And Hamas used to be the owner of that land, meaning all humanitarian aids, all money, all gas, food, medication, everything that comes to Gaza go through Hamas, meaning if any Gaza resident wants to have access to any all of this, he has to sympathize Hamas in some way. Right now, because there are Israeli troops on Gaza land, and because Israel is now allowing humanitarian aid agencies to go inside Gaza and replacing Hamas with those organizations, and the IDF be the one providing medication, food, gas, and all of that to the residents of Gaza, meaning that it's destabilizing Hamas. By allowing a ceasefire, by extracting forces, or by not continuing the warfare and allowing Hamas to regain control of some of those areas, eventually what it means that it allows Hamas to take its place as the one that hoards all of that resources and be the one distributing it the way it wants to the citizens, to the residents of Gaza, meaning regaining control over people's actions, regaining control of people's favors, and continuing to destabilize the situation, not even mentioning that they can resupply some of their outposts and some of their headquarters that have been damaged by the attacks of the Israeli defense forces, and maybe even move hostages even further down to more secured areas. We know that some of the hostages have already mentioned that they were in buildings that were attacked by the IDF in attempt for their release. So moving forces, hoarding resources, regaining some of their control over citizens is definitely something that Hamas is gaining from a ceasefire, from the IDF retracting, and for them to gain more control. And essentially, a ceasefire for Israel means the victors of terror. It means that terror has won. Israel has stopped retaliating to the terror acts of October 7th, and from the Hamas perspective, that is an absolute win. It means it was able to completely destabilize life in Israel and continue on fighting for another day. So Hamas has everything to gain from a ceasefire at this point, whether it's their own position in Gaza or the effect in the international world of the way Hamas is viewed, especially from a terror perspective, and also to the way it affects Israel. And just to continue to thrive in that area. That is my perspective of what Hamas gained from that. I don't know what it means about the relationship between all of the mediating countries like Qatar and Egypt and how they affect the situation. But that's what I view as what Hamas gains from that ceasefire.
So Dina's just a follow-up.
Yeah.
And I may be asking you things that you don't have privy to information on, I'm sure. But with the amount of presence that Israel has in Gaza now,
Mhm.
even though we are at a pause in terms of warfare, does Israel still have the ability to control travel around Gaza? I mean, are they, even though we're in a pause, are they able to prevent Hamas from retooling, or are they hamstrung in that regard?
So the IDF has took over a large portion of the northern part of the Strip, which is a very small part of the Gaza Strip. The southern part of the Strip, which is the most populated one with the major cities and the major Hamas headquarters, are still there and still uninterrupted by the IDF presence. The physical presence is only in the northern part of the Strip. That's where the Shifa hospital, we want to call it hospital, I call it the Hamas headquarters, Shifa, because there's so much evidence that this was used as a headquarters that they even saw footages of the hostages being dragged through Shifa hospital to the underground tunnels. So they don't have a complete control on the ground to the northern part of the Strip. We also know that there's still a very, very large piece of the tunnel structure that still exists, which is another advancements in the warfare that is still ongoing. They're still fighting in tunnels. They were just today released the notion that there was one kind of like a bomb shelter door in Shifa Hospital that was able to be opened today. 50 days after the operation has started, they still has not gained complete control of the northern part of the Strip, nor to the entire Strip. And the underground is still to be unknown. So a military control, if to be gained, is going to take months, if not years, to achieve. And with the stop of advancements, even though they can, I guess, still search through the area that the IDF has already took over, they're still not going to cover everything, just because it is an extremely complicated warfare. As part of my military service, I used to work in a military base that practiced specifically underground warfare, and so how complicated that warfare actually is. Add to the fact that it is part of civilian grounds, and add to the fact that there's also so much international pressure, and every single mistake that you make as a soldier might affect the whole situation. That's making it very, very much harder to eventually achieve military control. So there's a lot of different factors to be counted until you can actually consider even the northern part of the Strip to be under IDF rule. Right now, there's a lot of military presence there, but it is not under their rule.
Thank you.
Tim, if I can ask you a question, please. I know we are talking a lot about the Hamas, but do we know where the rest of the hostages, like I know that some of them with Islamic Jihad or
Yeah.
Also, so did you hear anything about it or any negotiation or anything about it?
So even Hamas admitted that they don't have all the hostages. Some were taken by jihad, by the Islamic Jihad. Some were taken by residents, just plain Gaza residents. And And we know that because some of the terrorists that were captured on October 7th admitted that Hamas has published an announcements for the residents of Gaza to whoever would be able to capture the Israelis is gonna get an apartment from Hamas. And again, this is another way of knowing that Hamas hoards all of the money and all of the resources that comes from humanitarian aid and everything that's going on in Gaza and distribute it however it wills to increase hatred towards Israel and Judaism. So we don't know where all the hostages are. Hamas has admitted that it doesn't know where the hostages are. And there's been a lot of ongoing kind of like conversations between political analysts whether Hamas is lying about that or not, right? What Hamas can gain from admitting that it doesn't have all the hostages. What it seems right now, at least, it will gain more from admitting he has full control over the hostages, and he doesn't. So, which means there's still a lot of hostages that are unknown to be found, nor by jihad even, but by just residents. Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
So, does that mean that these residents that are expecting reward of homes or whatever it is from Hamas, that does the hostage have to be alive or can they be dead? Because
we don't know. We don't know the status of the hostages.
At some point, Hamas will get this big reveal because people will want them to honor their promise of a house for a hostage. And it's hard to believe that I mean, yes, they can say they don't know for these reasons, but it would seem to me that a dead hostage could be easy to have. I mean, people are being killed by the dozens. You can just, it sounds like you could just scoop up a dead hostage and hold on to it and say, well, here's my hostage. Where's my house? I mean, it's so confusing to me.
That's the situation in Gaza. I know it's hard for us, at least from here, to try and imagine a world where there's no government and no authorities and chaos reign, but that's got the Gaza Strip. That's what Hamas profits from, is from this very, very hard, very unstable situation to exist where you don't even care if someone's alive or dead. That's the situation in Gaza. And that is how extremely hard it is to be someone in Israel who lives right next to Gaza, or even being a Gaza resident there. One of the hostages that was released, the one with the Russian passport, has said that he was managed to escape from his convicts and was recaptured by Gaza residents and delivered to Hamas 10 days after. You just don't know what's happening. You don't know whoever grabbed just a body that was shot on October 7th or grabbed a human person and kept it alive. We don't know. And the fact that humanitarian organizations are not gain access to the hostages to make sure that they're even alive is part of how traumatic this event is and how extremely biased every single one of them is. Because if the Red Cross had to encounter something like that in any other country, this would have been a storm in every possible case. But when it comes to Israel and when it comes to Jews, we don't matter. That's just the reality. And that's how biased and how politically charged all of those organizations are. Because this is the humanitarian aid crisis with the biggest violation of human rights you could ever seen on this earth. And no one cares. I mean, from the humanitarian rights perspective, at least. Yeah, go ahead, Sherry.
I really am troubled by that. I don't understand how that can be the case. Again, I know it's Hamas. I know it's a terrorist organization who's in control, but I would think with all the variety of people that are there with other citizenships, including some more Americans, that there would be more pressure for them to get in there. I mean, is there anything that we can do as Americans or other world citizens to get the humanitarian efforts to these people who are hurt and sick and starved and not getting medication? I mean, it's just unbelievable.
So I know my aunt here, Rita, was protesting today in the Red Cross building in New York, or was it the UN? If she want to share us a little bit from that, she's welcome. If not, that's okay. But there is a lot of
It was the UN,
the UN.
the women's office, women affair office in UN.
And
And I can't share. I'm on the train, so I'm sorry. There's a lot of noise, so I'm gonna mute myself again.
I would love to hear what you encountered.
They were ignoring us. They wouldn't even look at us. That's what happened. No one even stopped. That's the way they treat us. Unfortunately.
Thank you. That doesn't surprise me. Yeah, go ahead, Gabe.
Hi, thanks. The comment that was just made about the Gazan citizens, the Palestinians, recapturing the person and handing her back over to Hamas is, I think, the first comment that I've heard anywhere about the citizens of Gaza, the non-Hamas citizens of Gaza doing anything. All I keep hearing is that Hamas is in control and they're being a very authoritarian government, and there's never really anything said about the Gaza citizens themselves. And so that I wonder, Hamas was, quote, elected when in 2006, I think, and that was the last supposedly free election. And so since then, what I've been hearing is that the citizens hate Hamas and wish Hamas would go away. But if you look at that recapture and handing the person back to Hamas, that says that maybe the actual citizens of Gaza, not the Hamas fighters, but the citizens themselves, are not so negative about Hamas after all, which makes the future even more terrible to contemplate. Because even if Israel succeeds in eradicating Hamas, apparently there's at least some a part of the residents of Gaza that are actually on Hamas side.
So I'm gonna answer it from two different perspectives. I completely agree with you. This isn't the first time I'm hearing about this, but yes, we don't tend to talk a lot about this because we want to choose to believe that there's good people on both sides here. But there's two perspectives that you have to look through when it comes to understanding where this hatred is coming from. The first one is this ongoing conflict. There's been multiple occasions where there were attempts to reach an agreement between the Palestinians and Israel, and there's always been something that got in the way. There's been numerous terror organizations rising right after one after the other, whether it's Ashraf, whether it's the PLO, whether it's Hamas, Jihad, Hezbollah. All of those organizations are established by Palestinians that choose to not advocate for shared life. There's a lot of them. That's step one, and that's the historic point of view. If you look specifically at the Gaza Strip, right? Even if it was 50-50 for people who support Hamas and people who just want to live in quiet. That was in 2005. 2005 was 18 years ago. Am I doing the math correct? Yes. I'm doing it very quickly. 18 years of Hamas reign over Gaza. What do you think has happened to people who stand up to Hamas? Do you think that they're still there? Do you think that they still matter? And in addition to that, think of the children, 18 years of hateful education, 18 years of indoctrination to anti-Semitism, to hate and to kill Israelis has been ongoing. How many people that truly wants Hamas gone do you think still lives in the Strip? That's one. Two, how many of them do you think will actually raise their voice against Hamas and risk their life? And the third one is, think of how many of them don't know a different reality. So yes, and that trails to the harder question, which is, if after Hamas is gone, what's going to happen to the Gaza Strip? That's a very, very tough question because no one can answer it. There's three possibilities, right? The way we look at it. The first one is military rule stays. Gaza will remain under IDF rule, which is extremely hard, extremely bad for both sides, and going to cause more casualties as we go, both from Israeli side of the IDF and Gazans, because we know what's going on with military rule. The second one is that we put in the Palestinian Authority to be in charge. The Palestinian Authority doesn't have a legitimacy even in the West Bank. Not even talking about the way they treat the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And those are two very different groups. Palestinians in the West Bank and Palestinians in Gaza do not think alike. Those are two different situations, two different environments that doesn't necessarily work together. Trying to get them to cooperate might not benefit. We just saw a week ago that on the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, 2 residents of the West Bank were hanged from an electric tower because they cooperated with Israel. That was in the West Bank under Palestinian Authority rule. Think about what's happening in Gaza to someone who cooperates with Israel, right? And take all of that and think about what is the possibility next. Then I don't know, right? The most extreme idea that comes to mind is a territory exchange where Israel completely occupied Gaza and transfer everybody in Gaza to the West Bank. But that's another very, very extreme solution here. And without the involvement of other countries to be part of this, I don't see any viable solution. Not just the US, not just Western countries. Arab countries need to step up and be part of this. And right now, they don't seem to do so much. We've only heard from one Arab leader, and I think it was Bahrain, that stood up and says Hamas should be condemned for his actions. He also condemned Israel for the IDF strikes, which I'll say from in our perspective, that's pretty fair. But that's just one very small and insignificant Arab countries. All the big ones like Saudi Arabia, United Emirates, Qatar, Dubai, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, all of them hasn't said a word that is not appreciating Hamas. So I don't know what's going to happen next. It's not going to be good either. It's not going to be easy. And we're definitely going to continue to suffer from that on the long run. It's hard to present myself so non-optimistic. I tend to choose to be optimistic and look at the brighter side of things and look at the glasses to be half full. But it's extremely difficult right now to be so. And yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying, Gabe. This is very, very troubling and very hard as well. Go ahead, Josh.
A couple things. Thank you. First of all, we know from surveys that a significant proportion and possibly a majority of people in Gaza don't like Hamas, but it's not 99.5%. So that means you always have some people who are willing to go along with Hamas, especially if they're offering something. As for getting the Red Cross or other international bodies in to try to probe what's going on, at the risk of being a little blunt, analogize, ask yourself, how well does the Red Cross do in getting into Myanmar, where the junta has created an absolute nightmare situation, although there are civilian groups that have been arming, or North Korea, or Yemen, or for that matter, Russia. I think we should realize we're dealing with that kind of situation when we're talking about Hamas. It doesn't excuse it, but it means it's going to be extremely difficult for such an organization to go in. I know that the Biden administration doesn't want to put US troops into Gaza. I suppose one way to ensure the Red Cross gets in is for the US or NATO or the EU to send an armed force in, but they don't want to do that. So I suspect for that reason, again, ask yourself, how easy is it for the Red Cross to get into some of the places I mentioned? And that's probably what we're dealing with in terms of Gaza. I wish it were otherwise. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. If I can just have a follow-up question on that. Does the Red Cross says that? How badly does the Red Cross pressure that Hamas doesn't gain access to the hostages? How much of it is been, right, is been pressured by it on the international sphere?
I suspect a lot depends on what the governing body feels about its international reputation. Okay, Hamas realizes it has millions of people who favor it because they're anti-Zionist. So they don't have the same anxiety about their international reputation as, let's say, a Switzerland might. So that explains a lot of it. It's extremely unfortunate, but I think that is what we're dealing with.
So I think we'll Phyllis, you wanted to add something just before we finish?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I don't know, I'm very upset the fact that they haven't let the Red Cross in. And the fact is that Hamas is in violation of the Geneva Convention. And they do not tell the truth about what they're doing. They're violating, obviously, the Geneva Convention. They're violating the agreement they made to let the Red Cross in. But they're jerking, basically, I think they're jerking us around because they have the hostages.
Yeah.
And our main goal now is to get the hostages out and then get rid of Hamas. And until we get the hostages out, our hands are tied and they're going to keep jerking us around.
So
now, if Qatar would stop sending the money and arms, that would probably help.
That would. All right. Before we conclude this session, I really want to go back to the only positive thing we can do right now, and it's keep pushing, keep being proactive. Go to our website, check all the different possibilities that you can to be active about this, whether it's supporting organizations, spreading information, whether it's online or to your peers, organize meetings with people. If you want us in it, I'm on board. Let's do it. We've been doing a lot of small community gatherings where it's just you bring a couple of people you know to talk about this, whether they're Jews or non-Jews, to understand the depth of that situation. Doing a lot of work online. All of those actions, no matter how small or insignificant they look, they matter and they make a difference. And that's the only positive thing right now, is that we have to keep pushing because we have nothing else to gain from that rather than just to continue and be here. I know anti-Semitism is on the rise here. We're seeing the incidents everywhere. And as alarming as it is, we as the Jewish people have knew suffering in the past, and we've endured and will endure again because there's no other way. We have to keep pushing. We have to keep supporting Israel however we can. We have to keep fighting anti-Semitism, spreading information, talking to peers. Do not be intimidated to have those conversations with people. We have to be knowledgeable and we have to stand our ground and to continue support the Jewish people here and there. And that's the positive side of things. The Jewish people is coming together. People are getting together and understanding the importance of supporting Israel and being part of the Jewish people. And we have to continue on doing it. That's the only thing we can do right now. And it's the most important one as well. And again, I'm saying this not just because I think that's valuable, because I also want to finish this soon on a lighter note, and being proactive and choosing to change the reality around us is crucial right now for our survival and for us to eventually thrive. We're going to come out of this stronger, as we always have, and we're not going anywhere. So thank you all again. Have a better week than the one that was before, and I'm really looking forward to see you all again next Monday.
Thank you, Dean.